So it really is a pleasure to be here. And I'm supposed to talk about the art and science of doing epic shit. And I usually stress different parts of the sentence, doing epic shit. And sometimes I don't talk about doing epic things. Sometimes I talk about doing things. Sometimes I talk about art. Today I'm going to actually talk about science of doing. And why is that? It is precisely because we're in the middle of spring. I mean, the spring is starting, right? It's the time that the nature is going through transformation. And we have this privilege of living on the East Coast that actually we can see the seasons. And our body actually follows the seasons. So this is the time where actually our body is getting wrapped up to start changing and actually start doing things. Just as the days are getting longer and just as the plants are going to start sprouting. So this is the time of change and growth and transformation. So who of you thinks they're already doing some epic shit? Okay. Who could be doing more epic shit? Okay, cool. Who thinks a little bit of confidence would help them with doing epic shit? Okay, very cool. So I'm going to talk about confidence today. And we met with Geisha yesterday, and she was like, I'm going to talk about confidence. I'm going to mention confidence. I was like, right on, because I'm just going to write off what you said. So I'm talking about confidence today, right? So there's the game that you play on the outside, but there's this inner game here. And in my perspective as a psychologist, success starts here. It's the 6 inches between your ears. So confidence is that secret sauce that actually turns thoughts of doing epic shit into judgment, whether I can or cannot do epic shit, into action, right? Because a lot of us think awesome things, but then never make them happen, right? I just gave a talk to a whole bunch of women, and I said, what do you want to do this summer, this spring? And I swear to God, 80% of them said, I want to put my thoughts into action, right? We all have those great dreams, but then they barely ever become reality. And that missing link is actually confidence. So I'm going to hack confidence with you a little bit today. So slightly a little bit about me and why am I here and why I'm talking about what I'm talking. I actually started this whole journey into entrepreneurship, into psychology from a very different perspective. I actually studied genocide. I did my master's, double master's in genocide, psychology of genocide. So why do people kill? And I was always fascinated by the evil, right? And the darker side of the human beings. And I went really deep into shame, guilt, fear, hatred, you name it, humiliation, anything that would be on the darker side that barely anybody wants to talk about, right? We all like to talk about confidence and being smiling and getting epic shit done, but there is that shadow that all of us have right there. And from that work, I actually, so I had this great vision of like how human beings work, and then I left academia 3 times because I was kind of rebellious. And what I noticed is everything what I was studying would reply to me. So I was studying shame because I had so much shame. And I was studying fear because I was so anxious myself. And little by little, I actually started hacking myself. Having all this psychological knowledge, I started hacking myself. I added NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, hypnosis. I'm a really big fan of the whole unconscious world that exists that we all have and hacking that. And putting all those tools together, I created some kind of like magical toolbox through which the events I'm doing right now, both in person and for big companies, called SelfHackathons. So we literally go in and hack the self. So I'm very excited to be here and talk to programmers because we share a common language. I believe that human mind is the most untapped resource in the world, right? We only tap very little. It's not the 10 or 5% that they talk about, but we probably tap maybe 25, 30 at most. There's this vast creativity and this vast amount of knowledge and amazingness that we have, and we barely ever tap into it. And I will talk about why not. Second of all, I believe we live in code. Do you look at our DNA? It's a code. You look at how the brain is structured, it is actually a code. There's a whole bunch of if-then statements in our mind. The question is like, who programs us, right? Are we programming ourselves, or there's somebody else who programs the programmer, right? I like to say I program the programmer in my events. And finally, due to neuroplasticity, actually we can reprogram, rewire, and upgrade ourselves, right? You have a phone, you have an iPhone 6, I guess. And probably a couple of days ago, there was an upgrade. You went in and you upgraded your phone. Well, we barely ever do that with our minds, right? Somebody coded something when we were 5 years old, and then there was never any upgrade. So we very often operate from that perspective of a 5-year-old. And when we get stressed, what Geisha was talking about, we start acting like this 5-year-old, right? Because we never really upgraded this operating system, and it's the operating system of a 5-year-old. So what I encourage you to do is inspect your own code and your own programming and start seeing what's your matrix and what even language it's written in. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. I skipped too far. So that's the lay of the land. So I want to hack 3 things today, very briefly. Head, heart, and the environment. And I'm going to rip off or slide on what Geisha was talking about and go slightly more from my perspective, which is psychological perspective. So let's start with the head, right? So what's in the head? What do you guys have in the head? Besides the brain. What does the brain do? It thinks, right? So just as your liver secretes insulin and your thyroid secretes certain hormones, your brain secretes thoughts. And that's what it just does, right? So you can't blame the liver for secreting insulin, right? That's what it's built to do. And brain secretes thoughts. So mind hack number 1 is like you don't have to believe your thoughts. Because that's just, the brain is the money-making machine. Meaning-making machine. It just makes meaning out of whatever it gets, and usually it doesn't get the full information. The interesting part about the brain, and that's really where psychology comes in, is the inner critic and the limiting beliefs we have. How much do we think we're worth? What we can think we can do? And that's based on the structure of our brain that's actually wired to pay that much more attention to the negative than to the positive. So every negative event that happens in our life, we're like, oh, yes, I suck. I knew this is not going to work. I knew they're not going to like me, right? Because they're not smiling. My brain starts spinning, right, and creates a story. Well, maybe you should have prepared slides instead of those little note cards, right? Maybe people would have liked you more, et cetera, right? So my brain is already spinning a story as I'm talking to you. So I'm hacking myself real life right now, right? So once this negativity bias happens, we start spinning stories. And that's where the critic comes in. Who thinks they have an inner critic? Okay. Do you know what the critic says? Terrible things, right? They're very abusive. They're very abusive, unfortunately. So there are ways of hacking that. And I work with that a lot because limiting beliefs are one of the major things that I see hold back very smart people. So I consider you very smart people. You guys spend a lot of time in the head. We spend a lot of time in the head. And we keep spinning and spinning and spinning. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. What is she thinking? What is he thinking? There's a lot of time spent here as opposed to being grounded. So I believe from psychological perspective that being a self is a habit. It's a series of events that happen and a series of habits that you have created that constitute you, right? So really change is breaking the habit of being yourself, right? And what does it mean? That means actually understanding what your habits are, so you become like a researcher of yourself. You're like, oh, like when people don't smile, I start talking like this because I get nervous, I start speaking really fast. And why do I think people don't like me? Blah, 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 blah. And you start looking at the matrix that you wired as. And then you break the habit by introducing new habit. So that's why I talk about breaking the habit of being yourself. And it's those daily little tweaks and turns that break the habit of being yourself. And I led this workshop last weekend, and I said, who wants to be more confident? Everybody wanted to be more confident. And I said, you know, how would it be to be more confident? Everybody had this grand vision of themselves doing those awesome things. And I'm like, what could you do today that would prove to you that you're much more confident? And that's really where everybody's like, like, yes, I want to be confident, but I'm not ready to take the step today, right? And that dream is very nice, but actually doing the work, that's the painful part. So that's really how you break the habit, by actually doing. And so what I want to say is actually, if there's one thing, kind of following up on Geisha, that you can take from today, it is actually just the idea that confidence is taking action. So we can think awesome things and awesome thoughts, but confidence comes in when you actually take action and lean in. So let's talk a little about the body and the heart and fear. Who has fear? Fear, anxiety, New York, hello, right? We all do. And fear is the most powerful emotion there is. I mean, point blank. You read any psychological research, you watch any movie, fear is the dominant, the most driving emotion we can have. So we have to respect fear. Like, fear really deserves our respect because you disregard fear and it ain't going any good places. So, however, there's fear and there's courage. And courage is actually feeling the fear and doing it anyway, right? So really stepping into the fear and having the courage to go in. And you really look at the people who did amazing things. And actually, when you look at the brain circuits that are responsible for the flow state, right, which is the state of optimal engagement, optimal performance, you have to go through fear in order to go to flow state, brain-wise, right? So there is this fear first, and once you walk into the fear, there is flow, which is kind of cool when you think about from the brain perspective. And then when I was doing my undergrad in psychology, we, for some reason, when you were studying psychology, you would study mice and rats. So we actually had rats. I studied the little white rats. And we did this research. When you drop the rat into unknown territory, there's very cool behavior that you can see in any animal, pretty much. There's approach and avoidance pretty much happening at the same time. So they don't know where they are. They don't know if there's any trap. So they go in, and then they pull back, and go in, and pull back. And then there will be certain rats that eventually go in, and then there will be certain rats that just stay back. And it happens the same for people, right? We have approach and avoidance. Like, we want to, but we're afraid. We want to, and we're afraid. And the difference that makes the difference in the brain is actually is the courage. Is that how do you translate that activation that happens in the body? Is it activating, is it exciting, or is it activating and it's fearful? And so what I want to propose to you today is that I had a workshop 2 weeks ago with a Navy SEAL, and I asked him this question: how do you teach people courage? Because, like, I always thought this is just a personality trait. You're either born courageous or you're not. And he's like, no, it's not. He says, you have to give yourself permission to be courageous. It is a mental decision to be courageous and step into the fear. So my question is, who today is willing to give themselves permission to be courageous, to act in a courageous way? So just give high five to somebody to seal that off. Yeah, courage. So once you have courage, okay, so once you have courage, then you just do it, okay? And it's interesting. Some of you probably know how to actually, I'm a big runner. I run marathons, I run ultra marathons. And people usually ask me, like, and I constantly train for something, like all the time. You see me running, it's blizzard, raining. I'm like, no, I'm going running. And people ask me, like, how do you do it? And I always say, well, you just do it. Like, you literally just do it. You get yourself out and you go running. And then after 10 minutes, you're fine. And actually, the slogan that Nike came up with, they didn't come up with the slogan. The slogan actually comes from a runner in North New Hampshire, one of those really cold states up north, who actually would be running just like me, right? He was always training for something. You see them run, like, blizzard, snowstorm, he's running. And somebody asked him from Nike, they were like, well, how do you do it? I see you running all the time. He's like, you just do it. And then they say, how do you do it? He says, just do it. And that became the slogan of Nike. They actually took it from a runner. But that's this kind of mentality. Well, you put on your shoes, you lace your shoes, and you just do it. So that's where the courage, that's where the confidence comes in. And finally, I want to talk about the others. Because if any of you have taken social psychology, and I'm a social psychologist, I'm actually an experimental social psychologist, I'm not a typical shrink, as people think, far away from that. I actually believe that others affect us much more than how we affect ourselves. We are fundamentally wired to be social. When you actually look how big our prefrontal cortex is, it most likely, there's still debate, but evolutionary psychologists says it evolved because we had to cope with all the social strategies and the social matrix in the groups of 150 that we grew up in. So we just literally, our brain is wired to be social. So what's happening right now is I'm tuning into you and you're tuning into me. And every single time you guys have conversation with anybody, the brain and actually the heart rate also starts tuning in. It's kind of crazy. Like we start mirroring each other. And that's normal. That creates the rapport that we often talk about, right? And suddenly you're like, oh, I like this person. So hopefully you guys like me. So we're social animals. We are social animals. We so wired by others. The thing is, others program us. And kind of following up what Geisha said, who are you allowing to program you? Okay? Because given that we get programmed all the time, think about the 5 people you spend the most time with. And your question was, right, negative people. Are you aware of the fact that they're actually programming you on an unconscious level? Because I can prove that they actually do. And are you allowing that programming to come in, that negative energy, and it's like, oh, you know. And I come from Poland, so I know what fetching is. I know like what complaining is, because it's just Polish culture. And where my level of self-esteem goes after I spend a week in my home country, it just plummets. Because like everything sucks. You ask people, how was the day? And it's like, they're stealing again, and you know, the government, and the Russia is going to invade. And you become paranoid, obsessed, and depressed. So how do you protect yourself against that, right? Are you aware that this is actually affecting you? And there's very cool research coming from MIT and Harvard in which and now Facebook actually just proved it, showing that we are the average of 5 people we spend the most time with, by far. You look at your weight, you look at your self-esteem, you look at your money-wise, you look at your health, mood. The people you spend time with, you're the average of them, 5 of them. And then Facebook did this infamous study also, right, that when they didn't say, they were measuring all kinds of stuff. But they actually say if you don't show information about yourself, where did you go to school and what kind of movies you like, all they have to do is look at the 5 friends that you message the most with, and you're the average of five of them. And they can deduct information about you, and therefore they can target you based on your friends. So that's a little spooky, that's a little scary, but that's also very exciting to know that you can actually choose consciously who's going to program you. And for those of us who are introverts and don't like to spend time with people, the good news is that actually when you take authors or books, that counts as a person. So that counts, what kind of books are you reading? And how are those books, how is the information in the books programming you? So something I want to do, and because I like to talk, but I much prefer experiential stuff, so I want to do a little exercise with you to kind of end the day, okay? So if everybody's willing to stand up, and I'm going to stand up as well. So I would like for you to close your eyes for a second. Hopefully you don't have that much beer that you will fall over. And just imagine in front of you your future self, a self that's much more confident, that's doing that epic shit, that's maybe started that company, maybe did the things that you're still holding back, that person that's courageous, that's maybe fearless. So start seeing that person and pay attention, how do they look like? Do they look just like you? Maybe there's something different about them. What do they wear? Now imagine that you can see little bubbles coming from out of their head. What are they thinking? What is their self-talk? Now imagine you can see their values. What kind of values do they have? Now imagine them talking to other people. How do they talk? What do they say? How do people respond to them? When you have clear enough picture of that future self, that courageous, fearless, confident self, take a step in and actually step into that person that's in front of you. And feel how it feels like to step into that person. How does it feel in your body? Or there's different energy. Maybe you're standing taller. Maybe you have different thoughts. Maybe you're more grounded. Whatever that is, just imagine and feel into how does it feel to step into that self, that's that much more confident, that much more epic. Whenever you're ready, you can stay in that person, because that's you. That's the you that you're building. And that's the little seed I want to plant in you for this spring, for this to sprout and grow strong and take root in you, both in your unconscious and in your unconscious. So whenever you're ready, you can slowly and gently open your eyes and come back to here and now. And that's it.